Hello, guys. What's up and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm still your sister from another mother mummy show Love TV. In today's video, we're diving into the life of a true legend, a man whose words shook the world, inspired millions, and gave Africa its voice. Yes, I'm talking about the one and only Chinua Achebe. From a quiet boy in a small village in Ogidi to becoming the father of modern African literature, today we'll uncover his struggles, triumphs, wisdom, and the secrets behind his success. So stay tuned, because this is a story you don't want to miss, a story that will inspire you, move you, and leave you wanting more. Before we start, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you never miss the amazing stories we share here on our Mummy Show Love TV channel. So let's start now. Let me tell you the story of a man whose pen shook the world. His name was Albert Chinwalomogu Achebe, but the world knew him simply as Chinua Achebe. He was born on the 16th day of November, 1930, in a quiet Igbo town called Ogidi, in Anambra State, Nigeria. His father, Isaiah Okafo Achebe, was a man of the church, a teacher and catechist in the Anglican mission. His mother, Janet Ananechi Achebe, was the daughter of a blacksmith, a strong woman, wise in the traditions of the Igbo people. In their home, two worlds lived side by side. On one side, the Bible, hymns, and prayers filled the air. On the other, the voices of ancestors spoke through proverbs, folktales, and Igbo customs. Young Chinua grew up with both worlds in his heart. He was not an only child. The Achebes had 6 children in all: Frank, Zenobia, John, Flora, Augustine, and Chinua himself. Among them, Chinua was the 5th child. His sister Flora would also later become a writer, showing that storytelling ran in their blood. As a little boy, Chinua was quiet and thoughtful. He did not speak many words, but he listened deeply. When his mother told folk tales by the fireside, he listened. When his father read the Bible, he listened. Every story entered his spirit and stayed there. He began his schooling at St. Philip's Central School in Ogidi, where his sharp intelligence was quickly noticed. Later, he continued at Central School, Nekede, where his elder brother John was a teacher. It was here that Chinua's love for books began to grow. He would spend long hours reading, curious about the world beyond his small town. This was the beginning of a journey that would one day take him far. But even as a child, no one could guess that this quiet boy from Ogidi would grow into the voice of Africa. After his early schooling in Ogidi and Nekede, Chinua Achebe's sharp mind carried him further. In those days, not many children from small towns were chosen for higher studies. But Chinua was different. His brilliance opened doors. He was admitted into one of the finest schools in colonial Nigeria, Government College, Umuahia. This was no ordinary school. It was called the Eton of the East, modeled after the famous schools of Britain. There, the discipline was strict, the teaching first class, and the students carefully selected. At Umuahia, Chinua found himself among some of the brightest young minds of Nigeria. The school library was filled with books from Europe, and Chinua devoured them hungrily. But as he read, he noticed something troubling. In those stories, whenever Africans were mentioned, they were described as savages, primitives, people without culture or dignity. Achebe's young heart burned with anger. He knew his people had wisdom, proverbs, traditions, and great histories. Why did these books not tell the truth? It was at Umuahia that a thought began to grow in him. If they cannot tell our story well, then we must tell it ourselves. After excelling at Umuahia, Chinua moved on to the next stage of his journey. In 1948, he gained admission into University College, Ibadan, the first university in Nigeria, then affiliated with the University of London. At first, Chinua entered as a medical student. The plan was for him to become a doctor. But deep within, his spirit longed for something else. He wanted to understand people, history, culture, and above all, stories. So, after a year, he changed his course from medicine to English, history, and theology. This was a bold decision, but it was the path his heart demanded. At Ibadan, Achebe met other young writers and thinkers. He began writing short stories for the university magazine. His stories carried the rhythm of Igbo proverbs, the wisdom of folk tales, and the sharpness of modern thought. By the time he graduated in 1953, Achebe was no longer just a student. He had become a storyteller in the making. Little did he know, the world was already waiting for the story he would soon write. After graduating from the University College, Ibadan in 1953, Chinua Achebe stepped into the wider world. He began working with the Nigerian Broadcasting Service, NBS, in Lagos, as a radio producer. There, he was surrounded by voices, stories, and the heartbeat of a young nation finding its place under colonial rule. But Achebe was restless. Inside him, stories were knocking, begging to be told. He remembered the pain he felt as a schoolboy, reading foreign books that insulted Africa. Now he decided, I will write our story, the true story of my people. He began to write about an Igbo man named Okonkwo, strong and proud, a man whose life was torn apart by the coming of colonialism and missionaries. Achebe poured into the story everything he had, the proverbs of the elders, the wisdom of his mother's folk tales, the teachings of his father's Bible, and the struggles of his own people. But the road was not smooth. The manuscript of his novel almost got lost when a London typing service nearly misplaced it. Still, Achebe's determination carried him through. Finally, in 1958, at just 28 years old, Chinua Achebe published his first novel, Things Fall Apart. The book was like thunder in a clear sky. It shook the literary world. For the first time, Africa was not shown as a land of savages, but as a place of dignity, wisdom, culture, and humanity. Things Fall Apart was translated into more than 60 languages. It sold over 20 million copies around the world. Classrooms in Africa, Europe, America, and beyond began teaching it. Chinua Achebe had done what he promised himself as a boy. He gave Africa its voice. But this was only the beginning. Achebe would go on to write more novels. No Longer at Ease in 1960, Arrow of God in 1964, and A Man of the People in 1966. Each book carried the same message. Africa had its own story, and it must be told by Africans themselves. Achebe was rising higher and higher. But just as his voice grew loud, dark clouds began to gather over Nigeria. A storm was coming, the storm of war. The 1960s were a time of change in Nigeria. In 1960, the country gained independence from Britain. The people danced in the streets, drums echoed, and hope filled the air. Writers like Chinua Achebe believed a new dawn had come. But soon the joy turned bitter. Nigeria was divided by corruption, mistrust, and ethnic tension. Coups shook the land, leaders were killed, and the dream of unity began to fade. In 1966, violence broke out. Many Igbos living in the northern parts of Nigeria were massacred. Tens of thousands were killed, and survivors fled back to the east. Achebe's own people were in danger. By 1967, the eastern region declared itself a new nation, Biafra. And then the guns began to speak. The Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafra War, had begun. Achebe could not remain silent. He became an ambassador for Biafra, traveling across the world to tell the story of his suffering people. He met with foreign leaders, gave speeches, and used his fame to draw attention to the killings and starvation in Biafra. During those dark years, Achebe's pen wept. He wrote poems filled with sorrow, like Refugee Mother and Child and Beware, Soul Brother. He described children with empty eyes, mothers with nothing to give, villages burning and hope fading. His family also suffered. Bombs fell, food was scarce, and every day brought fear. But Achebe did not abandon his people. He stood with them until the very end. In 1970, the war ended in defeat for Biafra. The land was left in ashes, millions dead from hunger and bullets. Achebe's heart was heavy. The dream of freedom had fallen apart, just like the title of his first novel. But Achebe was not a man to give up. He turned once again to what he knew best, his words. If the gun could not save his people, perhaps the pen still could. When the war ended in 1970, the land was broken. But the spirit of Chinua Achebe was still alive. Though Biafra had fallen, Achebe knew his mission was not finished. He returned to what he loved most, shaping minds and telling stories. He became a professor at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, where young writers and students gathered around him. To them, Achebe was more than a teacher. He was a father, a guide, and a source of courage. But Achebe was not only concerned with classrooms. He believed African voices must be heard far and wide. So he helped to build the African Writers Series, a publishing platform that opened the door for many great African writers like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, Buki Emeketa, and Ama Ada Aidu. Through Achebe's guidance, a whole generation of writers found their voices. Yet Achebe's pen was not just for stories. it was also for truth. He looked at Nigeria after the war, and he saw corruption, greed, and failed leadership. So in 1983, he published a small but powerful book, The Trouble with Nigeria. In it, he wrote words that still echo today. The trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. Achebe did not fear politicians or generals. He spoke boldly, pointing out where the leaders had failed the people. Many did not like his words, but everyone respected his courage. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Achebe continued to write novels, essays, and poetry. He gave lectures around the world, carrying Africa's story wherever he went. By this time, Achebe was no longer just a writer. He had become the conscience of his nation, a leader who led not with armies but with wisdom. But fate was about to test him once more. On the roads of Nigeria, danger was waiting. It was the year 1990. Chinua Achebe was already known around the world as the father of African literature, a teacher, a leader, and the voice of his people. But life can change in the blink of an eye. One day, while traveling on the dangerous roads of Nigeria, Achebe was involved in a terrible car accident. The crash was so severe that his spinal cord was damaged. From that day onward, Achebe could no longer walk. He was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. For many people, this would have been the end, but not for Achebe. Though his legs could not carry him, his spirit stood taller than ever. Though his body was weak, his voice grew stronger. After the accident, Achebe moved to the United States for medical care and to continue his work. He became a professor at Bard College in New York, and later at Brown University in Rhode Island. There, he continued to teach, to mentor, and to inspire. Students from all over the world came to listen to him. In lecture halls, they leaned forward as he spoke softly but powerfully, teaching not just literature, but the dignity of African identity. Even from his wheelchair, Achebe never stopped writing. In 1987, just before his accident, he had published Anthills of the Savannah, a powerful novel about dictatorship and corruption in Africa. After the accident, he wrote essays, gave interviews, and remained a moral compass for his people. Many thought the accident would silence him. Instead, it only proved that Achebe's strength was never in his body, but in his mind, his pen, and his unshakable spirit. From his wheelchair in America, Chinua Achebe continued to shine like a guiding star. Awards and honors came from every corner of the world. He received over 30 honorary doctorates, and in 2007, he was given the Man Booker International Prize for his lifetime contribution to literature. But Achebe remained a humble man. He never chased after titles or power. In fact, twice, in 2004 and 2011, he rejected Nigeria's national honors, saying he could not accept awards from governments that failed their people. This act of courage made Nigerians respect him even more. In 2012, Achebe published what would become his final major work. There Was a Country, a personal history of Biafra. It was part memoir, part history. In it, Achebe shared the painful memories of the war that had scarred his people, and he spoke openly about the failures of leadership that had wounded Nigeria. The book sparked debate, but it was Achebe's last great gift to the world, a truth told without fear. Then, on the 21st of March 2013 in Boston, Massachusetts, Chinua Achebe breathed his last at the age of 82. News of his death spread like wildfire. The world mourned. From presidents to poets, from teachers to students, tributes poured in. In his hometown of Ogidi, he was laid to rest with honor. The drums sounded, hymns were sung, and the world bowed its head to the storyteller who had carried Africa's voice. Today, Chinua Achebe lives on through his books. Things Fall Apart is still the most widely read African novel in history, taught in schools from Lagos to London, from New York to Nairobi. He is remembered as the father of modern African literature, the man who gave dignity to African traditions, the man who showed that Africans can and must tell their own story. Achebe's life reminds us that even a quiet boy from a small town can rise to shake the world with nothing but words. So my people, when you hear the name Chinua Achebe, remember him not only as a writer, but as a prophet of truth, a teacher of wisdom, and the voice of a continent. Achebe is gone, but his words will never die. Even in his old age, Chinua Achebe never stopped being a voice of truth. From his home in the United States, he watched Nigeria from afar. Each time the country stumbled, Achebe spoke up. Each time leaders failed, His words reminded them of their duty. Students around the world filled classrooms to hear him speak. To them, Achebe was not just a writer. He was a living library, a bridge between Africa's past and its future. In his wheelchair, he sat with quiet dignity. But when he spoke, his words carried the weight of mountains. He told his students, "If you don't like someone's story, write your own." And many young Africans picked up their pens, inspired to tell the story of their people. In 2012, Achebe looked back at the darkest chapter of his life, the Biafra War. He gathered his memories, his pain, and his truth, and wrote his final book, There Was a Country. It was not just a history book. It was a cry from the heart of a man who had seen his people starve, suffer, and die. Some praised him for speaking the truth. Some criticized him for reopening old wounds. But Achebe had never been afraid of controversy. He believed the truth must be told, no matter how heavy. By now, Achebe was known as the father of African literature. He had won countless awards, medals, and honors. Yet he remained the same quiet, humble man from Ogidi. When Nigeria tried to honor him with national awards, he rejected them twice, in 2004 and again in 2011, saying the country's leaders had not earned his acceptance. This boldness made the people love him even more. Then, in March 2013, at the age of 82, Chinua Achebe's long journey came to an end. He passed away peacefully in Boston, America. When the news broke, the world stood still. In Nigeria, his people wept. In Africa, his name was sung. And across the globe, tributes poured in for the storyteller who had carried Africa's voice to the world. In his hometown of Ogidi, he was laid to rest. The drums of Igbo tradition echoed. Prayers rose to heaven, and the people knew a giant had fallen. Behind the great writer, behind the voice of Africa, there was also a husband, a father, and a gentle man at home. In 1961, just 3 years after Things Fall Apart was published, Chinua Achebe married a young woman named Christiana Chinwe Okoli. She was a teacher, intelligent and graceful, and together they built a marriage filled with love, patience, and quiet strength. The union was blessed with 4 children: Chinelo, their first daughter; Ikechukwu, their first son; Chidi, and Nwando, the youngest. To his students, Achebe was a professor. To the world, he was a famous author. But to his children, he was simply Papa. Even with his busy life of writing, teaching, and traveling, Achebe never forgot his family. He read to them, told them stories from Igbo tradition, and reminded them always to be proud of who they were. His wife stood by him through every season, through the joy of success, through the hunger of the Biafra War, and through the sorrow of his accident in 1990. When he was confined to a wheelchair, she became his strongest support. Together, they showed the world that true love endures every storm. Achebe's children grew up to carry on his legacy. Some became scholars, others professionals, all of them proud to be the children of the man who gave Africa its voice. But Achebe himself remained simple. Despite fame, he lived without arrogance. He never allowed pride to blind him. When people praised him as a giant, he would smile and say softly, "I only told our story." At home, he enjoyed quiet evenings, the laughter of family, the warmth of tradition, and the peace of a man who knew his mission in life. Today, his wife and children still honor his memory. They keep his works alive, they speak of his wisdom, and they remind the world that Achebe was not just an author, but a husband, a father, and a man who loved deeply. When Things Fall Apart was first published in 1958, no one could have imagined how far it would travel. But like a seed carried by the wind, the story of Okonkwo spread to every corner of the earth. Soon, Achebe's books were being read in classrooms from Africa to Europe, from America to Asia. Students who had never set foot in Nigeria came to know Igbo proverbs, traditions, and wisdom through his pages. Through Achebe, the world learned that Africa was not a dark continent, but a land of stories, dignity, and humanity. Great writers bowed their heads in respect. The Nobel laureate Nadine Gordimer called him a writer of universal resonance. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan novelist, called him a pathfinder, saying Achebe cleared the way for all African writers. Even American authors like Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou praised his courage and his vision. World leaders, too, honored him. Universities gave him more than 30 honorary doctorates. In 2007, he received the Man Booker International Prize, one of the highest honors in world literature. To many, he was not only a Nigerian hero, but a world treasure. But perhaps Achebe's greatest global influence was this. He changed the way the world saw Africa. Before Achebe, most stories about Africa were written by outsiders, often filled with stereotypes and prejudice. But when Achebe picked up his pen, he said to the world, "This is our story. We will tell it ourselves." From then on, African literature stood tall. Generations of writers rose, following the path he had opened. Some wrote in English, some in African languages, but all of them carried Achebe's fire in their hands. Even today, Things Fall Apart is one of the most translated books in history, available in more than 60 languages, with over 20 million copies sold worldwide. Every year, millions of new readers meet Okonkwo, and through him, they meet Africa. Achebe's influence did not end with books. His words are quoted in speeches, in classrooms, in churches, in parliaments. Wherever people speak of justice, identity, and truth, you will hear Achebe's voice echoing. He was not just Nigeria's son, he was Africa's voice. And in truth, he became a voice for all humanity. When Things Fall Apart was first published in 1958, no one could have imagined how far it would travel. But like a seed carried by the wind, the story of Okonkwo spread to every corner of the earth. Soon, Achebe's books were being read in classrooms from Africa to Europe, from America to Asia. Students who had never set foot in Nigeria came to know Igbo proverbs, traditions, and wisdom through his pages. Through Achebe, the world learned that Africa was not a dark continent, but a land of stories, dignity, and humanity. Great writers bowed their heads in respect. The Nobel laureate Nadine Gordimer called him a writer of universal resonance. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan novelist, called him a pathfinder, saying Achebe cleared the way for all African writers. Even American authors like Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou praised his courage and his vision. World leaders, too, honored him. Universities gave him more than 30 honorary doctorates. In 2007, he received the Man Booker International Prize, one of the highest honors in world literature. To many, he was not only a Nigerian hero, but a world treasure. But perhaps Achebe's greatest global influence was this. He changed the way the world saw Africa. Before Achebe, most stories about Africa were written by outsiders, often filled with stereotypes and prejudice. But when Achebe picked up his pen, he said to the world, "This is our story. We will tell it ourselves." From then on, African literature stood tall. Generations of writers rose, following the path he had opened. Some wrote in English, some in African languages, but all of them carried Achebe's fire in their hands. Even today, Things Fall Apart is one of the most translated books in history, available in more than 60 languages, with over 20 million copies sold worldwide. Every year, millions of new readers meet Okonkwo, and through him, they meet Africa. Achebe's influence did not end with books. His words are quoted in speeches, in classrooms, in churches, in parliaments. Wherever people speak of justice, identity, and truth, you will hear Achebe's voice echoing. He was not just Nigeria's son, he was Africa's voice. And in truth, he became a voice for all humanity. Chinua Achebe was not only a writer of stories, he was a philosopher of life. Through his books, essays, and speeches, he taught lessons that remain as fresh today as when he first spoke them. Achebe believed that stories were not just entertainment. To him, stories were power. He said, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." By this, Achebe meant that if Africans did not tell their own stories, the world would only hear the version told by outsiders. This belief guided his writing from Things Fall Apart to There Was a Country. He saw storytelling as a duty, a way to protect culture, dignity, and memory. Achebe never stayed silent about Nigeria's problems. In his famous book, The Trouble with Nigeria, 1983, he declared boldly, "The trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership." He believed that a nation rises or falls depending on the character of its leaders. For Achebe, good leadership meant honesty, humility, and service to the people. He reminded Nigerians that corruption destroys dreams, but truth and justice can rebuild them. Achebe was proud of being Igbo, proud of being African. He fought against the idea that Africa was backward or inferior. Instead, he showed the world that African traditions carried deep wisdom. He once said, "If you don't like someone's story, write your own." This was his call to Africans to take ownership of their history, to stand tall and never be ashamed of their roots. Beyond politics and culture, Achebe believed in the dignity of all people. He saw the world as one human family, where every culture had something valuable to give. This is why his stories touched not only Africans, but readers across the globe. To this day, his words are quoted in classrooms, in parliaments, in movements for freedom. He was a writer, yes, but more than that, he was a moral voice, a prophet reminding the world of truth, justice, and the power of stories. Achebe's wisdom was simple yet eternal. Tell your story. Lead with truth. Never forget who you are. On the 21st of March, 2013, in Boston, America, the voice of Chinua Achebe fell silent. At the age of 82, the father of African literature took his final breath. But his death was not the end. It was the beginning of 1,000 tributes, 1,000 stories retold, 1,000 hearts remembering the man who gave Africa its voice. From presidents to poets, from teachers to students, the world wept. Former South African President Nelson Mandela once called Achebe, the writer in whose company the prison walls fell down. When Mandela heard Achebe had died, his words rang true again. Africa had lost a giant. Newspapers across the globe carried his picture. Universities held lectures in his honor. Readers, young and old, went back to Things Fall Apart to hear once more the wisdom of the master storyteller. Achebe's body was flown home to Nigeria. In his hometown Ogidi, in Anambra State, the drums sounded. Traditional dancers came out. Priests prayed. Leaders gathered. Ordinary men and women lined the streets to pay their last respects. It was not just a burial. It was a celebration of a life that had changed the world. A man who had carried the name of Ogidi, the name of Nigeria, and the name of Africa to the highest places of honor. Today, Achebe is remembered not only through his books, but through his wisdom and courage. In schools across the world, students still read Things Fall Apart. Writers across Africa still call him their father and guide. Leaders and thinkers still quote his words on leadership and truth. Everywhere his name is spoken, there is respect, there is pride, there is gratitude. Though his body rests in Ogidi, his spirit walks in every library, his voice speaks in every classroom. His wisdom shines in every corner of the world. Chinua Achebe may have left this earth, but through his words, he will live forever.